If you've ever looked up how much you need to retire, you've been given one number, 4%. Save 25 times your annual spending, withdraw 4% a year, and you're done. It's the most repeated number in personal finance. It's in every video, every article, every calculator. The man who invented it doesn't use it anymore. In a book published in August 2025, William Bengen, the financial advisor who created the 4% rule back in 1994, revised his own number upward to 4.7%. Meanwhile, Morningstar, one of the most cited research houses in the industry, published its own figure for someone retiring in 2026, 3.9%. Same question, same year, nearly a full percentage point apart. And on a €30,000 a year retirement, that gap is about €130,000 of difference in what you're supposed to save. So this video is not going to give you the number. It's going to show you why there isn't one, why both of those figures were built for somebody who doesn't live where you live, and how to work out yours. Welcome to Wealthy in Europe, where we take the money advice you've been given and rebuild it for the continent you actually live on. The necessary bit. Nothing here is financial advice. I'm not a licensed advisor, I don't know your situation, and this is education only. Everything in this video is a framework for thinking, not a plan for you. Every number I put on screen comes with the assumptions it depends on, because a retirement figure without its assumptions is worse than useless. And retirement involves your national pension and your national tax rules, which vary enormously. So for anything that matters, talk to someone regulated to advise you where you live. To see why the number is shaky, you have to know where it came from. And the origin story is genuinely interesting. In 1994, a financial advisor called William Bengen did something nobody had properly done. He took decades of US market history and asked a simple question. If someone had retired in the worst possible year and withdrawn a fixed percentage of their savings each year, adjusting it for inflation, what's the highest percentage that would still have lasted 30 years? The answer was about 4%. And because 4% is 1/25th, it gave everyone a beautifully simple target. Save 25 times what you spend in a year. That was reinforced a few years later by the Trinity study, which ran similar numbers and found similar results, and between them the 4% rule became gospel. And I want to be clear that this was good work. It's honest, it's transparent, it's based on real data, and it gave ordinary people a target they could actually understand. The problem isn't the research. The problem is what happened to it afterwards. It got detached from every single condition it depended on and turned into a law of nature. Which brings us to the part almost nobody has updated. In August 2025, Bengen published a book called A Richer Retirement. In it, he raises his own figure to 4.7%, which he calls the universal safe max, the highest rate that survived the worst stretch in his data over 30 years. Now, why did it go up? Not because markets got safer, because he changed the portfolio. The original 4% came from a simple mix, half shares, half bonds. The new 4.7% comes from a portfolio spread across 7 asset classes, 55% shares, 40% bonds, 5% cash. More diversification, so the worst case gets less bad, so you can safely take a bit more. Hold on to that, because it's the single most important idea in this video. The withdrawal rate isn't a fact about money, it's an output. Change what's in the portfolio and the number changes, which means quoting a rate without saying what portfolio it assumes is meaningless. So if the rate is an output, the disagreement stops being mysterious. Morningstar's research puts the safe starting rate for someone retiring in 2026 at 3.9%, up from 3.7% the year before. And here are its conditions, which matter more than the number. A 30-year retirement, a 90% chance of still having money left at the end, steady inflation-adjusted spending every year, and a portfolio holding between 30 and 50% in shares, with the rest in bonds and cash. Put the two side by side and the gap explains itself. Bengen assumes 55% in shares. Morningstar assumes 30 to 50. More shares means more expected growth, which supports a higher withdrawal. Less means less. The two aren't contradicting each other, they're answering slightly different questions, and most of the difference is sitting right there in the share allocation. Morningstar also says the rate can go as high as 5.7%, but only if you're willing to flex. Adjust your spending down in bad years using what they call guardrails, hold inflation-protected government bonds, and delay claiming your state pension. And that third condition is where this whole conversation quietly stops being about you. Because Morningstar's 5.7% depends on delaying Social Security. That's the US state pension system. It has its own rules, its own claiming ages, and its own bonus for waiting, and it is not what you have. And Bengen's 4.7% has the same issue one layer down. That 7 asset class portfolio, its share allocation is split 5 ways. US large companies, US small companies, US mid-sized companies, US microcaps, and international. 4 of the 5 equity buckets are the US market. So the most authoritative safe withdrawal rate available is derived from a century of US market history in a portfolio that is mostly US shares, with a flexibility upgrade that depends on a US pension system. I want to be careful and fair here. This is not a claim that the numbers are bad, or that US researchers did anything wrong. They answered the question for the market they study, using the best data anyone has, and they publish their assumptions openly, which is more than most people repeating the numbers do. The problem is purely one of transplantation. A European investor holding a global or European tilted portfolio, whose state pension works nothing like Social Security, is inheriting a number tuned to conditions they don't live in, and there's no European equivalent to hand you instead. Nobody has produced an authoritative pan-European safe withdrawal rate, because Europe isn't one market, one currency situation, one pension system, or one tax regime. So I'm not going to invent one, and you should be suspicious of anyone who does. Here's the honest answer, and it's more useful than a fake, precise one. You don't pick a number, you pick a range, and you understand what moving inside it costs you. The arithmetic is simple. Your target portfolio is your annual spending divided by your withdrawal rate. At 4%, that's 25 times your yearly spending. At 3.9, about 25.5 times. At 4.7, a little over 21 times. At a more cautious 3%, it's 33 times. So let's make it concrete. Say you want 30,000 euros a year. At 4.7%, you'd need about 638,000. At 4%, 750,000. At 3.9, about 769,000. And at a cautious 3%, a million. Look at that spread. Same lifestyle, same person. And depending which authority you happen to read, your target moves by more than 350,000 euros. Which is why the useful question isn't what's the number. It's how much am I willing to be wrong, and in which direction. A lower withdrawal rate means a bigger target and a slower path, but more margin if things go badly early. A higher one gets you there sooner and leans harder on things going well. And there are 2 more things to hold in mind, both of which push in your favor, and neither of which I can put a number on. Your state pension, whatever it turns out to be, reduces the portfolio you need. But it's country-specific and it changes, so treat it as a bonus rather than a foundation. And most people don't spend at a flat rate for 30 years. Spending tends to move around. That flexibility is itself worth something, which is exactly what Morningstar's guardrails idea is getting at. There's one assumption sitting underneath every number in this video that I've mentioned 4 times and not yet examined. 30 years. Bengen's 4.7% is a 30-year figure. Morningstar's 3.9 is a 30-year figure. The original 4% rule was a 30-year figure. That number wasn't chosen because it's a law of anything. It's a reasonable planning horizon for somebody who stops working in their 60s. But a lot of the people who care most about this question aren't planning to work until 65. And if you retire at 50, you're not funding 30 years. You're funding 40, maybe 50. That is a genuinely different problem, and it pushes the number the other way. A longer retirement means more years for a bad sequence to show up, more years of inflation compounding against you, and less room to go back to work if it goes wrong. Researchers who focus on very long horizons generally land meaningfully below 4%, often in the low to mid-3 range, though I'd flag that there's no single authoritative figure there the way there is for 30 years, and you'll see different numbers from different people, which cuts in an uncomfortable direction. The people most drawn to early retirement need the biggest pot relative to their spending, not the smallest, because a lower withdrawal rate means a higher multiple. At 3%, you need 33 times your annual spending, against 21 at 4.7. Same lifestyle, and the early retiree's target is more than half as big again. None of which is a reason not to aim for it. It's a reason to know which question you're actually answering before you borrow somebody's number, because all of this hangs off one input you might never have measured: what you actually spend in a year. Everything we've just done multiplies that figure by somewhere between 21 and 33, which means an error in your annual spending gets magnified more than 20 times over. Getting your spending number right is worth more than agonizing over the withdrawal rate. To make it real, some illustrative European numbers. In Portugal, outside the big cities, a comfortable retirement is commonly put in the range of roughly 1,400 to 1,900 euros a month. In Lisbon, Porto, or the prime Algarve coast, more like 1,900 to 3,200. Porto tends to run meaningfully below Lisbon. Spain runs a little higher on comparable figures. A couple is often put at around 2,700 euros a month, and I'd treat all of these as starting points for your own research rather than answers, because the single biggest variable isn't the country at all. It's whether you own your home outright when you get there. Housing is the largest line in almost every retirement budget, and a paid-off home changes the arithmetic more than moving country does. Those are illustrations, not promises. They swing enormously with the city, the housing situation, and how you actually want to live. But run one through the machine. Say 2,000 euros a month, so 24,000 a year. At 4%, that's a target of 600,000. At 3%, 800,000. That's the whole exercise, and you can do it on a phone. What do I spend? Divided by what rate I'm comfortable with. That's the number, yours, with your assumptions visible, instead of somebody else's with theirs hidden. 3 things that can break the arithmetic, and they belong in any honest version of this. First, and most important, the order in which returns arrive. 2 retirements can average exactly the same return over 30 years and end completely differently, depending on whether the bad years came at the start or the end. A crash in your first few years while you're withdrawing does damage that a later crash simply doesn't, because you sold units to live on while prices were down, and those units never come back. That's called sequence of returns risk, and it is the entire reason a safe withdrawal rate is lower than the average historical return. The gap between the two isn't pessimism. It's the price of not being able to choose which decade you retire into. Second, inflation. The rules we've discussed already build in raising your withdrawal each year to keep pace. That's why it's a percentage of the starting pot and not a fixed euro amount forever. But it does mean the sum you need is a moving target for as long as you're saving toward it. Third, tax. Every one of these figures is before tax, and how withdrawals, dividends, and pensions are taxed is national. It genuinely differs across Europe, sometimes dramatically, which means the same portfolio funds a different lifestyle depending on where you're sitting when you draw on it. That's not a footnote, and it's the one part of this I can't generalize for you at all. So, the honest summary: the 4% rule came from real research into US market history in 1994. Its own author raised it to 4.7% in 2025 because he changed the portfolio behind it. Morningstar puts it at 3.9 for a 2026 retiree because it assumes a more cautious portfolio and a 90% success bar. Both are US derived, and the flexible upside depends on a US pension system. There is no authoritative European equivalent. What you're left with is better than a number, even if it feels like less. Work out what you actually spend. Pick a rate you can defend, somewhere in the range of about 3 to just under 5%, and know why you picked it. Multiply. Treat your state pension as a bonus. Remember that the order of returns matters more than the average, and recheck the whole thing every few years, because your spending will change, and so will the research. Anyone who gives you one number for retiring in Europe is giving you an American answer with the assumptions filed off. The assumptions are the useful part. Thanks for watching. If this was useful, subscribing genuinely helps, and nothing here was advice.